All right. I'm Dean Schafer. I'm presenting this work. This is a co-authored work that I was working on with Mehmet Yavuz and also Franziska Wagner. We started this together at CEU. We have since moved across the world. He stayed closest to home. I am now in the Deep South, and Franziska is in Chile. But we are still working together. So our motivation was for this was to develop a kind of a scaling method to distinguish illiberal actors using speech data. And we wanted to use an approach that allowed us that could travel across different country contexts, so we could compare parties both within countries but then across countries. And we wanted an approach that allowed us to measure different kinds of ideologies, different kinds of policy areas. And this one we focus on gender and immigration, but potentially the approach is flexible enough that we could use it to also measure social policy, education, parties' positions on various areas. So we used a word embedding approach combined with dictionaries. And so we wanted an approach, everyone these days is using LLMs. It's a bit much. So we wanted to use just a different, a little bit more old school approach that was also more interpretable. So the word embedding approach still allows us to account for context. It's sensitive to nuance. It does take advantage of computational methods that have like advances in it. But the dictionaries are very easy to interpret. You can look at the words, you know what they mean. They belong to a clear discourse, either illiberal, liberal, or different policy areas. And so we're looking at all parties in the 7 European AUTHLIB countries. We take our definition from Jolt's 2024 paper. We focus on 3 aspects of kind of like social cultural liberalism, anti-pluralism, cultural hegemony, and the kind of a villainizing discourse that villainizes the opposition and outgroups, and that kind of discredits or disallows any kind of negotiation. So this is the aspect of illiberalism that we're trying to operationalize. We are using parliamentary speech data. We knit together data sets from several different sources of parliamentary speech across these countries. You can see the year coverage here. So usually going back around 10 years or so, sometimes further depending on the data source. And all parties in those countries. So like a pretty thorough data set. So this is a very fancy map of our approach. First, we have our data sets. We break up speeches that can be very long, from 5,000 words to a few hundred words, into paragraphs, so that we have a equivalent. Or no, sorry, that's different. We break it up by party year. We break it up by party year, so that we have data sets broken up, so we can measure parties' positions in each particular party year. We train the word embedding models. And so the basic logic of word embeddings is that you can know the meaning of words by the other words that occur most often alongside it. And so you can use this to represent words mathematically in a kind of multidimensional space. And so words that are closer together are more similar, further apart, more different, because of how they're used, the co-occurrence. For example, a word like bread might be used often with other words describing food, dinner, home, these kinds of things. In our case, immigration might be used often alongside other words about political identity, culture, but also approval or hostility. In our case, and that's especially what we're interested in. So we have different dictionaries defining policy and illiberal or illiberalism. So for example, for migration, immigration, asylum, border, and then stems of migration and migrant. And for each word, we have a particular illiberal dictionary, because how illiberalism sounds changes depending on context, right? So in the case of immigration, we have like inclusive, diversity, acceptance on the liberal side. On the illiberal side, illegal, terror, threat, invasion. Border would be different, right? Border, maybe closed, policed, militarized, versus open, allow. So like, again, you have to be sensitive to context and how illiberalism sounds in different contexts. And so then what we do is we look in the word embedding space, we measure how close and how far these words are together. The phrase for this is cosine similarity. And so we calculate how close and how far each term is to the liberal terms, and we take that average, and then we take the average across each then term in the policy dictionary. And so we do that then to measure a party's position in that policy area for each given party year. How this word embedding space looks like, roughly. So it's a multidimensional space, but if you squashed it down to 2 dimensions, it would look something like this. So on one side, you have the liberal terms in blue, the various illiberal terms in red and pink on the other side. So you can see how these form clear, distinct discourses. These kind of cluster on their own into liberal and illiberal terms, or discourses. And then, so for example, we want to see how close different policy terms or topics are to these discourses. You look at, for example, the term global. And this is a word embedding space representing the government in Hungary, so Fidesz. And the term global is much closer to illiberal terms like elite, treason, or evil, treason, anarchy, against the nation, against our country, these kinds of things. It's far away from diversity, acceptance, reconciliation, mediation, negotiation, cooperation, these kinds of things. So in this case, this word would be scored as more clearly associated with an illiberal discourse, and probably other kinds of terms on international politics would as well, and then Fidesz would be scored as illiberal on this dimension. And so that's the basic underlying logic of our approach. And so we were thinking this as a way that can speak to chess approaches like chess, but we still do use chess as the gold standard. I still am not willing to discredit the use of experts yet, despite advances in computation. Like, hopefully I still have a job as well, right? Like, we all hope that we have a role as experts. So we compare with chess on immigration, and it correlates very well. So this is Austria, Czechia, again, by color, is different countries. You have the name for each party, and there's a pretty tight correlation between our approach on this dimension, text-based measure, and then chess, you can't see that very well, on the y-axis. So on a face validity check, it works. That you can use what parties say to measure their position on immigration using computational methods. We then compared to gender. And there we saw a difference. And so that we thought was curious. At first we thought maybe we did something wrong, but then the more we look at it, what we see is a kind of clustering. So the y-axis again is chess, and so whereas with our dimension, it's this kind of continuous across, and the parties are placed throughout the dimension, you see a kind of clustering where the far right parties are mapped by chess experts as clearly illiberal or more conservative, or liberal. So that what it seems to be the case is that chess experts are like they're using shortcuts, heuristics, based on party family to group them together. So that, and what is interesting then is you see like parties like the Fratelli are almost exactly the same as far as conservativeness on gender as Peace in Poland. And so this little cluster here, which is very far off of the kind of correlation axis, you see is like very far right, sometimes called like neo-fascist party. So you have the Liga in Italy, Fratelli, or SPD in Czechia. And so we want to dig into more, so what's going on here? And because our approach, we can look inside the word embedding space and interpret, this gives us extra information. And so what we found is that the kind of far right neo-fascist parties are doing something like performative gender inclusion. So on issues like women's equality, where it's like women are very close, this is for comparing Fratelli to PiS in Poland, where it's like they're using women closely with where it's like equality and fairness very far away from mother's tradition or family. Whereas the PiS in Poland, women are very closely associated with tradition, family, mother, so traditional family values. However, on LGBTQ issues, both are very hostile to LGBTQ issues and associate LGBT with evil ideology, propaganda, perversion, these kinds of things. But so because of the kind of performative gender inclusion of Fratelli, they get scored as more liberal on this particular dimension. They're doing this as a performance to justify excluding kind of conservative migrants, right? This is what the far-right parties are usually doing. To migrants that are seen as more conservative, usually Muslim populations. But so like they're kind of performing this as a protection of Western values. Okay, so that's kind of a check of the validation of the method. Also, what's it useful for though? Like what can we do with this? What does it add besides just another kind of equivalence to chess, right? So one is you get time series data. So this is parties' positions on immigration in Hungary. And what you see is a very clear shift in 2015. This is a reaction to the Syrian immigration crisis, where all of a sudden many parties become much more illiberal. Then the system polarizes. So Fidesz, in orange, stays very anti-immigrant. The rest, including Jobbik, which is a bit surprising, joins the rest of the opposition to take up the liberal opposition. And it stays that way, more or less. You see Mihizant coming in, and they're moving closer to Fidesz now. Another party system like Austria, more democratic, a little bit less polarized. You see an illiberal shift in 2015, especially the FPO. And then you see a gradual depolarization again, which is more possible in a more democratic system where coalitions can then break down, reform, negotiations happen, there's compromise, there's more space for that. You can even see like the Green Party for a short period of time in 2019, when they joined coalitions with the FPO, they even moved in their rhetoric closer to a more anti-immigrant position. Yeah, so in conclusion, we can map actors' positions based on what they say and how liberal or liberal they are. That's what we think we've shown with this. This could be applied to different kinds of speech data, not just parliamentary speech, but also social media, press releases. Actors' illiberalism does vary across policy and topic. And this provides an approach that gives more nuance within a broader topic to different kinds of policy areas. So, for example, a National Rally Party can be very anti-immigrant, but more liberal on issues like gender. And this tends to get kind of clustered among experts. We also offer time series data, so we can answer more questions about parties' reactions to different events in time. We can test arguments about inclusion moderation when parties go in and out of government, party competition, or polarization. Okay, thank you very much.